Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about the film Chappie. Neil Blomkamp is an interesting science fiction director in terms of the studio system because he's one of the few science fiction directors who's actually making things based on original ideas, not based on proven properties. And Neil Blomkamp has not had to do that throughout his entire filmography up to this point. Obviously, that's going to change with this Alien film. What happens to a lot of them is kind of like a weird Twilight Zone-ish catch-22. Sure, he has an original idea, but the execution of it is directed in the most hacked, hyperactive way imaginable that it's almost like you don't really care that it's original at all because of the way it's directed ruins any originality or any of the intellect or fun that concept should be able to have if that original idea had the kind of original direction that it really needs behind it. But Neil Blomkamp isn't really able to do that anymore. He has to have explosions. He has to have all this style. It feels like he could have a good movie in this one at least. The story of Chappie, if he left it alone, might have been a decent film, but he pushes almost too much terribleness and mixed ideas, kind of like the typical crap you get from a Hollywood film. You almost think this was made from a proven property and given to a hack studio director that no one really likes and ruins, because that's almost like how his execution is. It's a really sad thing to watch an original science fiction filmmaker almost destroying himself. It takes place in 2016 in Johannesburg, South Africa. They start using robot policemen who are given orders and sent out into the streets of Johannesburg to clean up the crime, and the crime rate goes down at an alarming rate. The inventor of all these, played by Dev Patel, decides that he wants to do even more with it and actually create a consciousness through a machine, and actually takes one of the robots that is going to be destroyed and puts a consciousness within him, or is about to, and is taking it in a truck from the company on his way home when a group of gangsters, mostly played by this rap group called Die Antwoord, who want to have a remote to turn off all the cops all at once. For some reason they think that exists, I don't know why, but then they realize they can use this robot to help them rob people and help them out as criminals. But Dev Patel wants to teach this robot and have its intellect grow and see what can be done with the consciousness within a machine, but unfortunately he's being raised by these gangsters and they name him Chappie. He starts to learn things about man and humanity, his own mortality since he has a battery pack that's fused to him and can't be replaced, and trying to understand the world and having his intellect and his consciousness grow as he continues to learn. The problem, I think, with Chappie, honestly not really the Chappie storyline necessarily, well there's still problems with that. The character of Chappie is actually played by Sharto Copley. Apparently it was motion capture. I didn't actually know it was him until I came home. The special effects with Chappie were amazing, and you really believe that robot's really there. It never occurred to me during the movie that he was. I thought they had a puppet or some form of robotics there, and that part is amazing and probably some of the more interesting, innovative special effects I've seen in a while, because you don't even question it. Now that I'm thinking about it, like, of course it's a motion capture idea, but during the film I really didn't. And even as shitty as this movie could really be a lot of the time, that's an amazing thing. Chappie's kind of like a combination of District 9 and Elysium. It does a lot of the things like Elysium, where it brings up things and drops them, is a little too hyperactive in its action sequences. It feels like, as an action director, he doesn't really understand what he's doing with the camera when he has a slow-mo sequence. His slow-mo sequences don't really mean anything in his movies. They're just complete style, but like, why are you trying to act like these films are meaning a lot more metaphorically when you also throw style in it, an empty style? It's just really bizarre what he's trying to do. It's just a huge mess of style and him picking out various styles at random. With Neil Blomkamp, my favorite film from him, and most people's favorite films who have taste, is District 9, and that was produced and kind of shepherded by Peter Jackson, which is funny now, because if someone was like, Peter Jackson actually helped a film have good storytelling, now I'd find that to be a joke. But it's kind of been true, because as soon as Neil Blomkamp was able to make any film he wanted, any way he wanted, there were a lot of problems with each of these films. It feels like there's far too much going on. When I gave my plot description, I even bring up Hugh Jackman and Sigourney Weaver and the plot lines with the gangsters, and they have to get money and do a big robbery. There was far too many plot lines, and like the Chappie plot line, if you had had that alone, this would be an interesting film. And if you look at District 9, that really had like a main plot line and a little bit of a B plot with the corporation and things, but not too much. So you could really feel for that guy. And it's almost like I can't really get into Chappie as much. Like, this film wants to be E.T. It wants to be a lot of those films where you have a fish out of water who's trying to understand humanity. And it just doesn't really want to entirely get into that kind of a thing. It wants to go off into all these odd avenues. The whole Hugh Jackman character was a complete waste. Like, why even have that in there? Why have someone like Hugh Jackman in such a nothing part who's playing this other rival inventor who invents this thing that looks exactly like Ed 209 from RoboCop? Was Neil Blomkamp really into RoboCop while he was making this film? It's like way too heavy into the RoboCop thing, which is weird because a year ago we had a remake of RoboCop. There's a lot of RoboCop and Verhoeven-y overtones in this film, and Blomkamp, in terms of his metaphors and everything he needs to say on his film, it's like wearing a metaphor on your sleeve. Like, you can see it and he wears it proudly. He kind of wants to make a smarter science fiction film, but he wants to do all these kind of dumb things with it also. It's like he's very counterintuitive in terms of what he's trying to do storytelling wise. And the Hugh Jackman character, it's like, yeah, I get that like the Dev Patel character represents one thing and Hugh Jackman's character represents another thing. He has a mullet and shorts on the whole time and even pulls a gun on Dev Patel in their office. There's a lot of things in this film that if you think about like logic completely fall apart, and certainly you can do that in a lot of movies, but this goes further into that where like it shows that the director isn't really thinking about all these details, and you can tell that with Blomkamp. He's not really thinking about all the details within the story. He just wants to get it to work. He's just basically a director who isn't told no, so he isn't thinking about the compromises anymore, because his life in terms of being a director doesn't have any compromises. He can make whatever the fuck he wants, however the fuck he wants. I don't think he understands really how that's not working. Stylistically, Chappie is a total mess. When you get to Die Artwood or Die Fartwood or whatever the fuck their stupid name is, why are they in this movie so much? Especially the guy in it whose name is Ninja, which is like the lamest rap name I've ever heard. He was a really bad actor, and I don't exactly understand what the point of having him in this film was. Why couldn't we have had a decent actor? Like, you have Hugh Jackman playing a part that's completely meaningless, and then you picked like your favorite rap group to be the stars of this movie. I don't understand why that happened. The girl from the rap group was actually okay. I mean, she wasn't good, but I thought she was a lot better than the guy was, who's just completely awful. He reminds you of your annoying boss you hate, but if your annoying boss also couldn't act very well. There's so many times where logic fell away just so the film could get to a certain story point, whether the film needed to get to it in terms of telling the story, or Neil Blomkamp just wanted to get there in terms of an action sequence. It just kind of sort of happened and you had to accept it. Its focus is so spread out between too many things. They do try to get into like these interesting ideas of like Chappie is asking Dev Patel's character like, why did you create me if you knew that I would die? And that gets into interesting playing God scenarios, and I think Chappie could really get into more of those things, but it's just not as interested in them. It feels like there's almost more love and care put into the action sequences than there really should have been in terms of the story. That's the kind of sad thing about seeing his last two films and realizing a lot of people have said it, maybe District 9 was a fluke. Then I didn't really have high hopes of this, mostly because of Elysium. Elysium killed all the high hopes I had for Neil Blomkamp. I don't have high hopes for his movies anymore. It's almost like he wants to be Michael Bay, but he can't help himself. He wants to say something with a little more substance than that, but he still can't help himself from being Michael Bay. He's almost in a weird moral conundrum where, like, if he had just given to himself and became a bullshit blockbuster filmmaker, I think that's a little more honest road to go down rather than what he's going down now. Certainly, like, people always bring up, like, you know, there's never original science fiction films anymore. And certainly this is actually based on Neil Blomkamp's first big short film, Tetraval. Whether something is original or it's based on a comic book or a video game or whatever doesn't really essentially matter in terms of storytelling, in terms of the movie you're going to watch. Like, who gives a shit? It's really about the the storytelling and the execution. It's not just about the idea itself. And when I watch Blomkamp's films, I've thought about that a lot, how it's really about execution, and more so with his films about the failure of execution. District 9 was executed in a really great way with the documentary opening. Through that documentary, you understand the history of that spaceship being there. At the beginning of Chappie, they kind of try to do that, but then drop it. There's a lot of ideas in here that are taken from his other films, and some ideas that were good from District 9 and some bad ideas from Elysium. Blomkamp certainly is an original filmmaker, and I like that about him, but I want him to be a good filmmaker. He is kind of almost there, and you can tell technically he could do it, but somehow in the editing and somehow when he puts these films together, they just become holy messes. Almost a kid who no one told no and doesn't understand how to compromise and has to have everything his way. It feels like when you don't tell a kid no and he's eating like chocolate pancakes for 3 meals a day. Hey, chocolate pancakes are great. I'd love to have some chocolate pancakes right now. I'm not gonna lie. The thing is, I understand you do that all the time. You're gonna be fat and bloated and gross, and you're gonna have weird pancake farts all the time. And Chappie is full of weird pancake farts. Why is his favorite rap group in here? Why is Hugh Jackman in here at all? Why is Sigourney Weaver was wasted, basically? These are things that he likes, so he throws them in there and throws in all this action, which he has to have, but he also needs to have this metaphor and say deeper things at the same time. He wants to be a thoughtful, more introspective person while still being a rich, bloated Hollywood director who gets his way. These are kind of directed in the same way shitty Transformers movies are, and they end up being about as memorable and about as interesting and about as inviting, really, that he really just can't compromise and make a really compelling film and a compelling narrative and not think so much about having to have all these elements in his films. And in Chappie, it feels like he has to have all these ideas or the whole thing will fall apart. His insecurity of it kind of not working on its own and not working if it's so simply is what tears it apart and then makes it not work. It's like he refuses to make it not work because of all his bloated ideas, and his bloated ideas just come up and just ruin everything in this movie. So if you have seen Chappie and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to. And I cut myself shaving, so that's why I have a band-aid. If you were wondering, or I was in a knife fight, if whatever narrative sounds better to you.